Join us on Sunday, November 19th, 2023 at 11 a.m. as we sing Hymns of Hope, music of our ancestors. This is music that was in the air at the time Sewickley Presbyterian Church was founded. It was a time of vigorous, unaccompanied singing. Singing schools and religious societies all played their part in a vast ocean of song. The choir will present tunes and texts from 19th century America as arranged by 20th century American composers, and together we'll sing more familiar hymns in the manner of our forebears, some of them right out of those early hymnals. So we are looking at the first hymn out of what might be the first hymnal that SPC ever used. It was published in 1830, which is 8 years before this congregation was officially incorporated. And the hymnal has the very attractive title, Psalms and Hymns Adapted for Public Worship, and approved by the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church of the United States of America.
Very, very creative.
It just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? So, what do you notice about this first hymn? How might it be different than what we have in our current hymnal, let's say?
The most obvious thing is there are none of the little dots that go along with many other hymnals. Right? No music.
No music at all. You're right. You're absolutely no music. And this wouldn't have been that unusual for a 19th century hymnal. Actually, it's quite common not to have any music. Well, a couple of reasons. Probably one of them being that most people couldn't read music. Another being that it was probably too expensive to put it in. So you would just have a set of words. But then the question is, well, did they sing? And the answer to that is obviously yes, they did sing. I mean, this is, I think of St. Augustine's classic definition of the hymn, in which he said, a hymn is a song of praise to God.
Okay.
And then, being Augustine, he goes into great detail on all three of those points. This is his 3-point sermon. That is, it has to be addressed to God, or it's not a hymn. It has to be of praise, or it's not a hymn. And you have to sing it, or it's not a hymn. So if it's just poetry and you say it, it's not a hymn. So at the top of the page here, it says hymn. So obviously there had to be music. It's just not on the page. And the question is, how does it get there? And the answer really is that you have a song leader who is responsible for coming up with a tune that people can sing. Because, originally, when a hymn is written, often it's by a clergyman. Pastors wrote a lot of hymns.
Sure.
Now, one of the hymns that we're singing at Word Song was actually written by a textile worker.
Oh, wow.
So it's not always a pastor, but a lot of times it's a pastor. And frequently they're either not musically trained or, maybe they're just not a composer.
I assure you that both are the case.
Well, in that case, you would want to go find a tune somewhere.
Okay.
And now, these days, in our current hymnal, sometimes we do have that instance where somebody wrote the text and the tune.
Okay.
But more often than not, the person who wrote the text either, goes to their friend and says, hey, can you write a tune? Which happens sometimes. There's the famous case of Fanny Crosby and Phoebe Knapp, for instance, in the 19th century. One writes the text, one writes the tune. But most of the time, if you go back far enough, you're looking at a text, and then the question is, we have to supply a tune. And the way that's done is, remember, these are folks that can't read music in a lot of cases. And so what you do is you find a tune that already exists and that people know.
Okay.
And you say, we're going to sing it to that tune.
It's making it fit.
It has to fit. That's the problem. Sure. As long as it fits, you can sing it.
Yeah. So then, with a hymnal like this, where you've got words but no music, could you? Go into 4 different congregations and find them singing the same words to different tunes?
You could. You could find a
fascinating.
lot of different texts and tunes. In fact, that's where we're going next.
Okay.
How do you find a tune, and why are there so many that wind up being sung with the same text? So here's how it works. Let's take a familiar hymn, and we're going to start by counting the number of syllables in each line. For example, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, 8, that saved a wretch like me, 6, I once was lost, but now I'm found, 8, was blind, but now I see, 6. So, what have we arrived at? 8686. In our current hymnal, we have something known as the Metrical Index. It's clear in the back of the book, and it gives us a list by number of all of the different hymn tunes which have 8686 schemes. That is, 8 notes for 8 syllables in the first line, 6 for 6 in the second line, 8, 6, and so on. And there's quite a list here, actually. 8686 is also known as common meter because it's very common. And one of the first things you'll notice on the list is a tune called Asman. Asman probably doesn't figure as part of your regular vocabulary, but you've sung it before, and most probably you sang it to the hymn, "Oh, for a Thousand Tongues to Sing." Now, here's Paul singing Amazing Grace to the tune of Asman.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see.
That worked pretty well, didn't it? Well, let's give it another try. There's quite a list here. We better get cracking. How about Prospect? Now, there's a tune you might not know as well, but we do sing it still, usually to the hymn, "My Savior Will Supply My Need." So here's Amazing Grace to the tune of Prospect. Take it away, Paul.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see.
Now, as long as you choose tunes that fit the metric scheme, things are mostly going to be all right. But suppose you pick a tune that has too many notes for the syllables of text, or not enough. That could give rise to incidents like the one described in a book brought to my attention by Mary Beth Pistorius of the Historical Society of our church. It was written 50 years after the church's founding, but it describes the singing in the Sunday school meetings that predate our congregation's formal beginnings in 1838. The singing was led by Mr. Vance, who had a fine voice. Sometimes, in Mr. Vance's absence, Mr. Grossman would assume both duties, but as he frequently attempted long meter tunes to common meter hymns, he was successful only in affording infinite merriment to the less sedate part of the congregation.
To demonstrate, Paul's now going to sing something that maybe doesn't quite fit as well. We're going to try Amazing Grace to the tune of Old 100.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see.
What Paul did there was to sing a common meter text to a long meter tune, to take poetry that is 8686
and stretch it to fit a tune that is 8-8-8-8, which meant he had a couple of extra notes left at the end of the second and fourth lines. Thus, saved a wretch like me, and was blind, but now I see. That's the sort of thing that apparently inspired merriment among the less sedate. So you can't just sing any text to any tune, but if you know the secret of carefully matching text to tunes by their number of syllables, it is surprising what kinds of discoveries you can make. For instance, here is the text of Amazing Grace to the tune of Gilligan's Island.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see.
For the first half-century after Amazing Grace was written, there was no standard tune to sing it to. At first it kept appearing in hymn books as only a block of text, and somebody, like a song leader, had to supply a tune to sing it to. All kinds of tunes were probably used, not including Gilligan's Island. When it did first appear with music, the tune's name was Hephzibah, and it sounded like this. Spiffy little tune, isn't it? It's a surprise it didn't catch on.
So I've got a list of some of my favorite tunes for you, okay? These are fun.
Okay.
Now, remember, they had to come up with thousands of different names. And, some of them sound a little bit like racehorses.
Sure, or a boat.
Or a boat, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So here's one of my favorites, Heveredal.
Okay.
That's actually Welsh for delightful.
Ah, okay.
So it has a meaning. That's actually the one that was written by the textile worker.
No kidding.
His claim to fame was he was the assistant loom tender at the Welsh flannel manufacturer.
Ah.
And he wrote this tune for a children's Sunday school book.
Oh, wow.
At the time, he was a teenager. So he was practically a child when he wrote this for children. So one of my favorites, in case you don't know it off the top of your head, we sing this at Christmas a lot.
Okay.
To the text of Come Thou Long Expected Jesus.
Okay.
And when it's not Christmas, sometimes we will sing it to Love Divine, All Love's Excelling.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
that's the two. That's Heveredal. So besides the ones that are in foreign languages with fun names, there are several actually. Some of my other favorites include geographic descriptions.
Okay.
These are kind of pedestrian because they often just come down to the street on which the pastor who wrote the text or the tune lived.
Sure.
So, for instance, there's Duke Street,
Okay.
which we're actually singing this Sunday on the 12th. There's Bellevue, Regent Square.
Right. Okay.
Right, like the neighborhood in Pittsburgh.
Right.
Now, I should say the week that the bridge collapsed in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago,
All right.
we were all gathered in church. The choir was preparing for the hymns that morning, and we had chosen, a month ahead of time, we had chosen 3 hymns which were all about firm foundations.
Oh my goodness.
I kid you not.
Right.
And one of them was called Christ is the Sure Foundation. Now, this bridge had collapsed on Friday.
Oh my gosh.
And I used to run over that bridge. I would go jogging across that bridge. It was about a quarter mile from where we lived. So I was really, thinking about this bridge. And here's the hymn, Christ is the Sure Foundation. And what do you think the tune name?
Oh no.
Somebody in the choir, one of our tenors, said, hey, did you notice, because in the corner, down at the bottom of the hymns, in all caps, it says the tune name, Regent Square.
Oh, wow.
And we went, oh, okay.
What a strange combination
So-
on a Sunday like that.
Yeah. So sometimes the names,
Right.
seem curiously
Yeah.
relevant. But that's geography.
Yeah.
One of the hymn tunes that we sing every Sunday is called Old 100.
Right. Okay.
You know that one?
Yeah.
That's the doxology.
Okay.
Now, the reason it's called Old 100 is because it originally appeared in the second edition of the Genevan Psalter,
Okay.
and that was overseen by a fellow named John Calvin.
So we've heard something about.
I think we've heard about him. So he oversaw that production. The text was originally in French,
Okay.
but it was originally associated with Psalm 134.
Really?
But eventually it became associated with Psalm 100.
Okay. These backed it up a few dozen.
They backed it up a little. And now it's not anymore.
Yeah. Okay.
So, which makes me think about when I first moved to Pittsburgh, and you're new in the neighborhood, and you want directions,
Right.
right? And somebody will say to you, oh, you go up to the top of the hill, you make a left where the gas station used to be, right?
Right.
And then a couple blocks down, you turn, where that tree was they cut down 40 years ago, right? And you're supposed to know.
Yeah.
So there it is, enshrined in the Old 100. It's not
Yeah.
the 100th Psalm anymore, but it used to be.
Yeah. It's the block
100th.
where Shop and Save was.
Right. There you go. Right. And probably my favorite then. Redhead 76.
Redhead 76.
Redhead 76.
Tell me there's a story.
I wish there was a story. It's actually a little bit of a downer.
Okay.
Because all that really happened was they named it after the composer.
Okay.
His name was Richard Redhead.
Oh.
And he published a collection of hymns. And this one was the 76th hymn in the collection.
Oh my goodness.
So-
yeah. And
It's fun to try it out at parties, but it's really just very practical.
Right.
Many of our forebears were very practical
Sure.
in how they named their hymn tune. So that's what they did.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, you'll come up with one that either because it was written for the text, or maybe the text and the tune came together pretty quickly. And it almost seems as if it has some real theological connection.
Okay.
So, one of the texts that the choir is singing for word song is to the tune of Invitation.
Okay.
And I like that
Yeah.
for obvious reasons. So what will we be singing? Well, we're going to start off with a piece called Bright Canaan, whose text talks about going to the glorious land of Canaan and asks, "Who will come and go with me? I am bound for the land of Canaan." This text and tune is set by the duo of Robert Shaw and Alice Parker, who are practically royalty in the choral world. Then we'll sing Keep Your Lamps, an African-American spiritual arranged by living composer Andre Thomas. This text exhorts us to keep our lamps bright and burning because the day is drawing nigh. That's the day of God's judgment. Imagery comes from the 25th chapter of Matthew and the parable of the 10 wise and foolish virgins. Next we'll sing O Happy Souls. This very curious text, which was set by Alice Parker, comes from a man named Samson Occam, who wrote that while others have gone on before us and have gone on to the reward, we're not upset about that. We aren't jealous. We're happy for them. And those that they have left behind, we'll join them someday. Mr. Ockham was a Mohican Indian who became a Presbyterian minister. He was born in 1723, which makes this his tricentenary year. Happy 300th, Mr. Ockham. Next we'll sing Bound for the Promised Land, another piece about getting to Canaan. This tune exists in both major and minor keys, and while the choir will sing the minor key version, later on there will be an instrumental offertory in which you hear both iterations of the tune. We'll follow that up with How Can I Keep From Singing, a famous Shaker tune, which says that even in the midst of adversity, how can I not continue to cling to hope? Next comes Hark, I Hear the Harps Eternal. This is another piece arranged by Alice Parker. The hymn first appeared in a collection with the curious title Dream Music. It certainly is a dream of a land beyond. Then it was picked up and reprinted in the hymnal The Olive Leaf of 1892. And finally, we'll sing John Rutter's version of Down by the Riverside. I'm going to lay my burdens down by the riverside, and I ain't gonna study war no more. This is Isaiah's version of the peaceable kingdom, in which strife and dissension have ceased, and we have only peace and security. This message seems particularly timely. And then it's your turn. Throughout the service, we'll be singing familiar hymns, and toward the end, we're going to have a small hymn sing. Hymns like Amazing Grace, paired with its familiar tune of New Britain, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, Holy Manna, How Firm a Foundation, hymns like that.
The choir will be singing directly from 19th century hymn books, including the Sacred Harp. Although it probably was not used at SPC, its publication date of 1844 means that it was in the air at the time of our founding. This is the most famous of all the shape note songbooks. Shape note singing flourished in America in the 19th century. Instead of all round notes, there are triangles and squares and diamonds. Some anonymous soul decided that instead of all round blobs on a page, it would improve singing to associate different shapes with different degrees of the scale. If you want a fuller explanation, there are many pages at the front of the book devoted to explaining the method. Even today, adherents of the system swear by its effectiveness.
But my favorite part is what comes next under the rules for singing. And since you are all going to be choristers on Sunday, it seemed appropriate that we should learn a few of those rules. These folks took their singing very seriously.
Care should be taken that all the parts, when singing together, begin upon the proper pitch. If the parts are not united by their corresponding degrees, the whole piece may be run into confusion and jargon before it ends. So basically try to start on the right note. It is by no means necessary to constitute good singers that they should sing very loud, and if the singers of any one are so loud that they cannot hear the other parts because of their own noise, the parts are surely not rightly proportioned and ought to be altered. So sing out, but as John Wesley puts it in his own directions for singing, do not bawl. In applying the words, great care should be taken that they be properly pronounced, and not torn to pieces between the teeth, nor forced through the nose. Honestly, I don't even know what to do with that one. Too long singing at a time injures the lungs. A cold or cough, all kinds of spirituous liquors, violent exercise, too much bile on the stomach, long fasting, the veins overcharged with impure blood, etc., etc., are destructive to the voice of one who is much in the habit of singing, An excessive use of ardent spirits will speedily ruin the best voice. Eat healthy? If singers, when performing a piece of music, could be as much captivated with the words and sounds as the author of the music is when composing it, the foregoing directions would be almost useless. We should therefore endeavor to improve the talent given us and try to sing with the Spirit and with the understanding, making melody in our hearts to the Lord.
So we're calling the program Hymns of Hope. And that, of course, is connected to the sermon series and the curriculum for this fall. One of the things that I noticed when I was putting this together is that there are different ways to introduce the idea of hope. All of these pieces in some way address our current anxiety and suggest that things are going to be better, that there's something to hope for, but they do it in slightly different ways. For instance, personal holiness, in the case of something, say, like Sweet Hour of Prayer, which the choir will be singing during prayer time, and that sort of addresses the idea that, you know, you pray, you read your Bible, you seek a closer relationship with God, and that's what you hope for.
Yeah.
Then we have an African-American spiritual about keeping your lamps burned and bright because the day is coming soon, right? So that day being the day of God's justice. So this is what we're hoping for. God's justice is going to come among us. But by far the most popular of the three, we are here, but we are bound for somewhere else. And that can be the land of Canaan, which is symbolic, you know, for something, or the promised land in another, or the eternal realms. You know, so again, it seems to me that probably also had a lot of popularity because in the 19th century, of course, you think about the pioneers, you think about how they were constantly on the move, they're constantly going somewhere, and so that's a metaphor they can easily understand.
Sure. Yeah.
Although we can probably understand it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the hope is it's such a big word for the tradition, and so we talked about the hope window a few weeks ago, where it has that anchor in the stole, and the anchor being one of the earliest symbols that Christians used. And there's actually, you mentioned the hymn with the lamps, and there's this fabulous lamp in the museum at Pittsburgh Seminary. Actually, I think I brought it here at some point for a class, but it's about this big. And it's pottery, and in the spout of the lamp there's an anchor, and so there's this wonderful lamp, the symbol of light with an anchor on it, this symbol of hope, and kind of combines the two of them. And even that notion of being destined for another land, and the anchor kind of it encompasses all of that, right? So I mean, what does an anchor do? Right, an anchor goes from where it belongs, dry ground. Right, and it gets plunged into this hostile foreign environment where there is no air, right? Where metal can rust, where there are creatures unlike any you've ever seen, and it comes out unchanged, right? And so this notion that the anchor symbolizes hope because we belong somewhere else, right? We are going somewhere. Yeah. See the lamp and that security. Hope is
and you have to cross water to get there.
Right. Yep.
Very turbulent. There are several pieces about crossing the river.
Right. Yeah. And that's as people of faith, right? We pass through the waters of baptism, right? So that the anchor, right, being something that holds you safe through the waters. It's all there's a lot of artistic beauty in that, and that's all about hope. Right, that anchor symbolizing hope, and you see it played out in so many different ways. That it's fun to see it, and not just in visual imagery, but to see the way that it gets picked up then in poetry and in music and in word and in sound. It's such a central part of our faith.
And in song, indeed.
Yeah.